Have you ever stopped to imagine what happened in the exact moment Jesus took his last breath on the cross? While the earth trembled and the sky darkened, something extraordinary was happening inside the temple, far from the eyes of the crowd watching the crucifixion. A sacred fabric, over 30 feet high, made of the finest linen and embroidered with threads of gold, tore on its own from top to bottom, without a single human hand touching it. It was the temple veil, the most important curtain in all of Judaism, and it was ripped apart the instant Jesus died. That moment changed everything, absolutely everything. But why do so few of us stop to reflect on what really happened there? Why does this supernatural event remain a mystery to so many people? And more importantly, what does it have to do with your life, with your struggles, with your moments of pain, and with your search for something more? Today I want to take you on a different kind of journey, a journey that goes far beyond historical facts or biblical trivia. I want to show you how this torn veil has everything to do with the barriers you face in your spiritual life, with that feeling that God is distant, with the moments when your prayers seem to hit the ceiling. If you stay with me until the end, I promise you'll discover not only the mystery behind this extraordinary event, but also how it can completely transform your relationship with the sacred, bringing an intimacy with God that you may not even know is possible. Imagine for a moment the scene inside the temple that day, the most sacred place in the Jewish world, where only the high priest could enter, and even then, only once a year. An atmosphere heavy with reverence, where the silence was broken only by the sound of cautious footsteps of those who served there. The stone walls echoed whispers of prayers that rose like incense, and the golden light of the lamps danced on fabrics embroidered with celestial artistry. And then, in the most unexpected moment, as Jesus surrendered his spirit to the Father, the impossible happened. The veil, that curtain separating the holy place from the Holy of Holies, that physical barrier representing the distance between the human and the divine, was torn with a sound that must have echoed throughout the entire temple. It wasn't a small or partial tear. It was a complete rupture, from top to bottom, as if invisible hands had decided that this separation could no longer exist. But do you know what impresses me most about this story? It's that this veil didn't just represent a physical separation. It represented every separation that exists between us and God, every barrier that prevents us from living in true intimacy with the Creator, every distance we feel when we most need divine closeness. How many times have you felt like that? As if there were a thick curtain between you and God, as if your prayers hit the ceiling and fell back unanswered, as if heaven were a distant, inaccessible place, reserved only for special people or those holier than you. This feeling of separation isn't unique to you. It's something we all experience at some point on our journey. Think about the most difficult moments of your life, those nights when you cried until you had no tears left, when despair seemed to be the only companion you had. Remember that time you looked up to the sky and whispered a desperate prayer, only to feel like your words were lost in the void? Or when you walked into a church, knelt down, tried to feel God's presence, but all you found was silence and a strange sense of talking to yourself? This experience of spiritual distance is more common than we imagine. It's like we're living on one side of a locked door, knowing that on the other side there is love, peace, healing, and hope. But we can't seem to find the key. It's like being in a dark room, knowing there is light, but being unable to find the switch. And you know what makes it even more painful? It's when we look at other people and it seems like they have something we don't. It seems like their faith is stronger, their prayers are more powerful, that they can feel God in a way we can't. It's as if they have special access to the sacred, while we're left on the outside, looking through a frosted window. But I have news for you, news that can change everything. That veil that tore when Jesus died wasn't just a historical event. It was a declaration. It was God saying to all of humanity that the separation is over, that the distance no longer needs to exist, that intimacy with the divine is not a privilege for a few, but a right for all who believe. You need to understand that, before Jesus, religion worked in a completely different way. There was a rigid hierarchy, a system of intermediaries, complex rituals that had to be followed to the letter. Ordinary people couldn't approach God directly. They depended on priests, on sacrifices, on elaborate ceremonies. It was as if God lived in a house with high walls, locked gates, and guards at the entrance, and only a few special people were allowed to get close. The temple veil was the ultimate symbol of this separation. It divided the holy place from the Holy of Holies, the space where it was believed God dwelt in a special way. It was a magnificent fabric, about 30 feet high and several feet wide, made of the finest materials and embroidered with designs representing cherubim. It's said it was so thick that it would have taken several people pulling with all their might to tear it. And it was precisely this veil, this seemingly unbreakable barrier, that was ripped apart the moment Jesus gave his life for us. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't an accident caused by the earthquake that happened at that moment. It was a deliberate act of God, a visual and physical demonstration that something fundamental had changed in the relationship between heaven and earth. But why is this so important for you today? Why should this ancient story touch your heart now, so many centuries later? Because the barriers that veil represented still exist. Perhaps they aren't physical barriers of fabric and embroidery, but they are very real barriers that live inside of us. There's the barrier of guilt, that inner voice that whispers you've done too much, messed up too much, hurt too many people to deserve God's forgiveness. It's as if there's a list of your mistakes written on an invisible wall, constantly reminding you that you're not worthy of divine love. There's the barrier of shame, that feeling that if God really knew you on the inside, if he saw all your thoughts, all your weaknesses, all your secret desires, he would be disappointed in you. It's as if you have to be perfect to be accepted, as if you have to clean up your life completely before you can approach the sacred. There's the barrier of fear, that apprehension that God might be like the people who have let you down in life. Maybe you had absent parents, religious leaders who hurt you, relationships that ended in betrayal. And now, even though you want to trust God, a part of you whispers that maybe he too will abandon you, judge you, or reject you when you need him most. There's the barrier of unhealed pain, those deep wounds that have made you build walls around your heart. Maybe you prayed for someone you loved, and that person died anyway. Maybe you asked for deliverance from a difficult situation, and it only got worse. Maybe you waited for an answer that never came. And now there's a part of you that protects itself from disappointment by keeping God at a safe distance. There's also the barrier of empty religiosity, when you were taught that you need to follow rules, perform rituals, behave in a certain way to be accepted by God. It's as if spirituality is a constant test, where you need to achieve a passing grade. You go to services, repeat the right words, make the appropriate gestures, but deep down you feel like you're just playing a role, not living a real relationship. And there's the barrier of self-rejection, when you've internalized critical voices that told you you're not enough, that you have no value, that you don't deserve good things. You look at yourself and see only flaws, weaknesses, limitations. How could someone like you possibly interest the creator of the universe? How could God want intimacy with someone so ordinary, so troubled, so broken? All these barriers are real. They don't just exist in your imagination. They are walls that have been built brick by brick, through painful experiences, hurtful words, accumulated disappointments, and distorted teachings you've received throughout your life. And they have a very concrete effect. They keep you separated from the intimacy with God that your heart so deeply craves. But here's the beauty of what happened when that veil tore. All of these barriers, all of these walls, all of these separations that seem so solid and permanent have actually already been broken. The tearing of the veil was not just a historical event. It was a prophetic declaration about what has become possible for you and for me. Imagine if you could live without these barriers. Imagine if you could wake up in the morning knowing, truly knowing in the depths of your heart, that you are completely accepted and loved by God exactly as you are today. Not after you get better, not when you manage to get rid of your flaws, not if you become a more spiritual person, but right now, with all your imperfections, fears, wounds, and limitations. Imagine if you could talk to God like you talk to an intimate friend, without forced formalities, without beautiful words you don't truly feel, without having to pretend everything is fine when it's all falling apart. Imagine being able to come before him with your naked heart, your real tears, your honest doubts, your deepest fears, and knowing that all of it is not only welcome, but is exactly what he wants from you. Imagine if you could live with the certainty that you never again have to carry your mistakes like a heavy weight on your back. That forgiveness isn't something you have to earn through penance or good behavior. but something that has already been given freely and is available to you at any moment, as many times as you need it. Imagine if you could face life's challenges knowing that you are not alone, that there is a constant presence by your side, a strength that is greater than any problem, a wisdom that can guide you when you don't know which way to turn, a love that can heal any wound, no matter how deep. This isn't fantasy. This isn't positive thinking. This is exactly what became possible when that veil tore, because that tear wasn't just in the physical fabric of the temple. It was in all the barriers that separated us from a life of real intimacy with the Creator. But maybe you're thinking, if that's true, why do I still feel so distant from God sometimes? Why do I still have moments when it feels like He's not listening? Why do some prayers seem to go unanswered? These are valid questions, questions that stir the heart of anyone seeking an authentic spirituality. The answer isn't simple, but it is deeply comforting. The veil was torn, the barrier was removed, access was granted, but we still live in a broken world, in a body that ages, in a mind that sometimes struggles with doubt, in a heart that carries scars from past experiences. The spiritual reality of our union with God is perfect and complete, but our emotional and psychological experience of that reality is still being renewed day by day. It's as if you've been given a magnificent house, but you're still learning to feel at home in it. The keys are in your hand, the door is open, all the rooms are available to you, but sometimes you still act like you're just a visitor, as if you don't have the right to be there. And you know what? That's normal. That's part of the process. Learning to live in the reality of the torn veil is a journey, not a switch you flip and instantly everything changes. It's a process of discovering who you truly are in God's eyes, of unlearning lies you've believed about yourself, of healing wounds that have created distorted thought patterns. But the fact that it's a process doesn't mean you have to wait to start experiencing this intimacy. It doesn't mean you have to prepare better or be more worthy before you draw near. Remember the veil? It tore from top to bottom, not bottom to top. It was a divine initiative, not a human one. It was God coming to us, not us managing to get to Him. This means that even on your worst days, even when you feel your faith is weak, even when you've made mistakes that make you feel ashamed, even when your life is a mess and you don't know where to begin to sort things out, access to the heart of God remains completely open to you. It's like having a friend who always leaves their front door unlocked for you. It doesn't matter what time you show up, what you're wearing, whether you're happy or crying, whether you have good news or problems to share, the door is always open because you are always welcome. And maybe that's exactly what you need to hear today. Maybe you're going through a time when you feel distant from everything and everyone, including God. Maybe you're carrying guilt that makes you feel unworthy of love or forgiveness. Maybe you're facing a situation so difficult that your faith is flickering like a candle in the wind. If that's you, I want you to know that the veil is still torn. The door is still open. The invitation to intimacy still stands. Not because you deserve it, but because you are loved. Not because you are perfect, but because God's love doesn't depend on your perfection. Not because you have it all figured out, but because it's precisely when we have nothing figured out that we most need divine closeness. I'd like to take a short pause in our conversation, just for a moment. If this message has touched your heart and made sense to you, I invite you to give it a like. It's a simple gesture, but it helps us reach more people who, just like you, need a word of hope. And if you're not yet part of our community, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next videos. More than that, I have a special invitation for you. Think of someone you love who is going through a moment of pain or uncertainty. Share this video with them. It could be the seed of hope they need to blossom. And finally, use the comments to tell me what you felt. I really want to know about your experience and how this message touched your soul. Your comment is an important part of our journey, because understanding the torn veil is just the beginning of a much bigger transformation that God wants to do in your life. A transformation that starts in the heart and extends to every area of your existence. Now that you've begun to understand what the torn veil means, I want to take you a little deeper on this journey. Because it's one thing to know that the barrier has been removed. It's another thing entirely to learn to live in the reality of that freedom. It's like getting the keys to a new house. Having the keys doesn't automatically mean you know where every room is or how to truly feel at home there. You know what impresses me most when I think about that veil tearing? It's that it didn't rip slowly. like old fabric giving way over time. It tore all at once, from top to bottom, in a decisive and irreversible movement. It was as if God himself were saying, "Enough of separation, enough of distance, enough of you living as if you're not welcome in my presence." And that makes me think of a question you may have never asked yourself. What happens when you truly believe there is nothing left separating you from God? How does your life change when you discover that you can talk to him at any time, about any subject, without needing fancy words or special moments? Imagine waking up in the morning and your first reaction isn't anxiety about all the problems waiting for you, but a natural conversation with God, like sharing the day's plans with someone who truly cares. Imagine facing a tough decision at work and being able to stop right there, in the middle of the hallway, and ask for wisdom, knowing you are being heard. Imagine receiving news that scares you and being able to immediately run into the arms of someone who has the power to change any situation. This isn't religious fantasy. This is what became possible when that veil was torn. But why do so many of us still live as if the barrier is still there? Why do we continue to behave like strangers in God's presence when we are, in fact, welcome children in the Father's house? I believe one of the reasons is that we've been taught to fear intimacy. Not just intimacy with God, but intimacy in general. We live in a culture that teaches us to wear masks, to show only our best moments, to hide our weaknesses and vulnerabilities. We've learned that to be accepted, we need to be perfect, or at least pretend we are. And so we bring that mentality into our relationship with God. We think we need to get ourselves spiritually cleaned up before we approach him. We think we need to be having a good day, with our faith on a high, with our emotions in check. We think God only wants to hear from us when we have something uplifting to say, when our prayers sound nice and mature. But you know what I've discovered? God doesn't want the edited version of you. He doesn't want your spiritual best behavior. He wants the real you, with all your mess, all your doubts, all your fears and hopes mixed together in a heart that sometimes even you don't fully understand. Remember when you were a kid and you got hurt playing? You didn't stop to think if you deserved care or if you were presentable. You just ran crying into the arms of someone you knew loved you. There was no analysis, no self-judgment. There was only the need and the certainty that you would be held. That's how God wants you to approach him. Not with the forced maturity of someone who thinks they need to impress, but with the raw honesty of someone who knows they are loved unconditionally. When you're broken, you can come broken. When you're confused, you can come confused. When you're angry, you can come angry. The veil was torn precisely so you wouldn't have to fix yourself before you arrived. And that revolutionizes everything. Because when you understand that you are accepted as you are, something incredible happens. You begin to change naturally. Not because you have to in order to be accepted, but because unconditional love has that power to change us from the inside out. It's like a plant that was in deep shade and is suddenly placed in the sun. It doesn't have to strain to grow. It doesn't have to fight to turn green. It doesn't have to force its leaves to open. The sunlight does that naturally. When you live in the light of divine love, without barriers, without veils, transformation happens as a consequence, not a prerequisite. But I know it's not always that simple. Sometimes you try to draw near to God and you find resistance within yourself. Sometimes you want to trust, but fear whispers that it's too dangerous to let your guard down. Sometimes you want to believe you are loved, but an inner voice insists on listing all the reasons why you don't deserve that love. Those voices are not the truth about you. They are echoes of old wounds, reflections of painful experiences that taught you to protect yourself through distance. Maybe you were rejected by important people in your life. Maybe you were criticized when you showed vulnerability. Maybe you learned that love comes with conditions, that acceptance must be earned, that intimacy is dangerous because it can end in abandonment. But God is not like the people who hurt you. His love doesn't work like the human relationships that disappointed you. When the veil was torn, it wasn't just a change in the temple's architecture. It was a demonstration of the divine heart, a heart that can no longer bear to live separated from you. And you know what that means in practice? It means that when you're going through your worst crisis, God isn't waiting for you to get out of it to draw near. He is right there in the middle of the storm with you. It means that when you make a mistake that makes you feel ashamed, God doesn't cross his arms waiting for you to redeem yourself. He extends his hand to help you up. It means that when you're in a phase of life where everything seems to be going wrong, when you look around and see your dreams crumbling, when you wonder if God really cares about you, the answer isn't in some spectacular mystical experience. The answer lies in the simple, profound reality that there is no more veil. The distance you feel isn't real. The separation that seems so concrete is an illusion created by pain, but not a spiritual reality. This reminds me of a time I was talking with a friend who was going through a deep depression. She told me something I've never forgotten. I know God loves me, I know it in my head, but I can't feel it. It's like there's a thick pane of glass between me and God. I can see He's there, but I can't touch Him. And I understood exactly what she meant. Sometimes our emotional state, our mental health, our chemical imbalances, our unresolved traumas create a fog that makes it difficult to perceive the divine presence. But that fog doesn't change the reality that the veil was torn. It's like a cloudy day. You may not see the sun, but it's still there, still shining and warming, even if you can't feel it directly. Faith in this context isn't about always feeling God's presence. Faith is about trusting in the reality of the torn veil, even when your emotions don't confirm that reality. It's about believing you are loved even when you don't feel lovable. It's about knowing you are accepted even when you reject yourself. And here's something that might sound strange, but is profoundly liberating. God doesn't need you to feel His presence for Him to be present. He doesn't need you to understand His ways to keep working in your life. He doesn't need you to have perfect faith to love you perfectly. Doesn't that take a huge weight off your shoulders? You don't have to be a good Christian to have access to God's heart. You don't have to maintain a certain standard of faith to remain His child. You don't have to manufacture religious feelings to be welcome in the divine presence. The veil was torn for people like you and me. Complicated people, people who have good days and bad days, people who sometimes doubt and sometimes believe, people who make progress and sometimes regress, people who are imperfect and will continue to be imperfect until the last day of our lives on this earth. But do you know what happens when you start to live in this freedom? When you stop trying to earn God's love and simply receive it? When you stop hiding behind spiritual performances and are just yourself in His presence, something beautiful begins to happen. You start to discover who you really are. Not the version of you that others expect, not the version you think you should be, but the original version. The one God dreamed of when He decided to create you. It's as if you've spent your whole life wearing clothes that don't fit and suddenly discovered the wardrobe made especially for you. You begin to understand that your wounds are not defects that disqualify you from divine love, but places where that love can enter and bring healing. That your weaknesses are not reasons for shame, but opportunities to experience strength that comes from above. That your fears are not signs of a lack of faith, but invitations to discover a courage that isn't born from you, but flows through you. You begin to realize that prayer isn't a religious ritual you have to perform perfectly, but a constant, natural conversation with someone who genuinely cares about every detail of your life. That worship isn't just music at specific times, but a posture of the heart that recognizes divine goodness in the midst of the ordinary every day. And perhaps the most transformative discovery is this. You begin to understand that the Christian life is not about striving to get to God, but about recognizing that God has already come to you. It's not about building bridges to heaven, but about living in the reality that heaven has come down to earth. It's not about breaking through barriers with your own efforts, but about celebrating the truth that the greatest barrier has already been broken. This completely changes your perspective on life's challenges. When you face a difficulty, you don't face it alone. When you need to make an important decision, you have direct access to infinite wisdom. When your heart is broken, you have a comforter who knows every fragment of your pain and knows exactly how to put the pieces back together. And in moments of joy, you have someone to share it with who rejoices with your joy, who celebrates your small and large victories, who is proud of you not for what you do, but for who you are. But let me tell you something about this intimacy with God that you may have never considered. It doesn't make you less human, it makes you more human. It doesn't make you perfect, it makes you authentic. It doesn't eliminate your problems, but it gives you a different perspective on them. You are still you, with your unique personality, your particular tastes, your specific dreams, your own ways of seeing the world. God doesn't want to turn you into a standardized copy of religious holiness. He wants to help you be the best version of who you already are. It's like an artist working with a rough gemstone. He doesn't want to turn the diamond into a ruby. He wants to reveal the unique brilliance that is already there, hidden beneath the layers that need to be removed. Each person has a specific brilliance, a particular beauty, a unique contribution to offer the world. And when you live without veils between you and God, you begin to discover what your specific brilliance is. You start to understand your unique role in the grand symphony of life. You begin to realize that you are not a cosmic accident or a replaceable part in a giant machine, but an intentional creation with a divine purpose. That purpose may not be something grand in the world's eyes. It may not involve fame, financial success, or public recognition. It might be something as simple as being a presence of peace in your family, offering words of hope to discouraged people, or demonstrating unconditional love in relationships where it's rare. But regardless of your specific purpose, something is universally true for all of us. You were created for relationship. Relationship with God, relationship with other people, and an authentic relationship with yourself. And the torn veil is what makes all these relationships possible in their deepest, truest form. Because when you no longer have to hide from God, you also stop hiding from the people around you. When you feel fully accepted by the Creator, you can offer genuine acceptance to others. When you experience divine forgiveness, you can forgive and ask for forgiveness in ways that previously seemed impossible. If this reflection is touching your heart, give it a like and share it with someone special. Tell us in the comments, how have you experienced this closeness with God? But I know that sometimes, even when you understand that the veil was torn, even when you know there is no longer any separation between you and God, there are still moments when life hits you so hard that you wonder where this divine intimacy that seemed so real just a short while ago has gone. There are nights when you lie in bed and feel an emptiness in your chest that seems impossible to fill. There are mornings when you wake up with an inexplicable anxiety, as if something terrible is about to happen, even when objectively everything is fine. And in those moments, a part of you whispers that maybe this story of the torn veil is too good to be true. Maybe it's just a poetic metaphor that doesn't translate into real relief for your concrete pain. Maybe God is indeed near, but in a way so subtle that it makes no practical difference when you're sinking in despair. I understand that feeling. I understand it because sometimes it seems there's a vast chasm between theological theory and emotional reality, between knowing you are loved and feeling loved, between believing God is present and experiencing that presence in a tangible way when you need it most. And you know what I've learned? That this tension, this struggle between what you know to be true and what you feel in the moment, is not a sign that your faith is weak or that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're human. It's a sign that you live in a broken world, in a body that sometimes gets sick, in a mind that sometimes gets dysregulated, in a heart that carries scars from experiences that have marked you deeply. The torn veil doesn't mean you will never feel pain again. It doesn't mean your life will become an uninterrupted sequence of inspiring moments and spiritual victories. It means something much deeper and, at the same time, much more practical. It means that even in your most intense pain, even in your darkest moment, even when you can't feel anything but emptiness and despair, you are not alone. Let me explain this in a way that might make more sense. Imagine you're undergoing complex surgery. You're under anesthesia, unconscious, completely vulnerable on an operating table. You can't see the surgeon, you can't hear them. You have no conscious perception of what's happening. But that doesn't mean the surgeon isn't there. In fact, it is precisely when you are most vulnerable and unconscious that the most important work is being done. Sometimes our spiritual journey is like that. There are times when we can't perceive God's presence, can't feel His love, can't hear His voice, but that doesn't mean He has moved away. It could mean that we are going through such a deep process of inner healing that our consciousness can't keep up with what's happening in the deepest layers of our soul. And here's something wonderful about the torn veil that I want you to understand. When that barrier was broken, it wasn't just you who gained access to God's heart. It was God who gained complete access to your heart. This means He can work in your life even when you're not actively cooperating, even when you're not being spiritual, even when you're in a phase where you can barely pray. It's like having a friend who has a key to your house. They can come in and take care of important things even when you're not there. They can water your plants when you forget, tidy up the mess when you have no energy, and leave food in the fridge when you're too weak to cook. You might come home and find evidence that someone was there looking after you, even if you didn't see them. God works in your life this way. Sometimes you go weeks or months feeling distant from Him, wrestling with doubts, facing situations that drain all your emotional energy. And then suddenly you look back and realize that, in some mysterious way, you made it through, that you found strength you didn't know you had, that things resolved in ways you could never have planned, that you came out stronger, wiser, more compassionate than you were before. That's not a coincidence. It's evidence that the Holy Spirit was at work in your life even when you couldn't perceive it. It's proof that there is no longer a veil separating you from divine action in your story. But let me talk about something that might be even more comforting. The torn veil also means that God is not shocked by your struggles. He isn't surprised when you have crises of faith. He isn't disappointed when you go through phases of rebellion or distance. He doesn't get impatient when you take a long time to learn the same lessons He has tried to teach you over and over. Because when there's no veil between you, God sees everything. He sees your deepest motivations, even when your actions don't perfectly reflect them. He sees your sincere desire to grow, even when you behave in immature ways. He sees your love for Him, even when you're angry with Him. He sees your faith, even when you're full of doubts. It's like when you've known someone for a long time and can see past their surface behavior. When your mother is stressed and speaks sharply to you, you don't automatically conclude she doesn't love you. You understand she's going through a tough time. When your best friend is irritable and says hurtful things, you don't end the friendship immediately. You recognize that something deeper is going on. God knows you better than anyone, better than you know yourself. He understands your reactions, your defenses, your emotional survival mechanisms. He knows that when you pull away from Him, it's often because you're afraid of being disappointed again. He knows that when you get angry with Him, it's because you care enough to feel betrayed when things don't go as you expected. And instead of being offended or pulling away, He stays. Instead of giving up on you, He keeps working. Instead of waiting for you to calm down to approach again, He remains present throughout the entire emotional storm. This makes me think of all the times you might have felt guilty for not being spiritually well. How many times have you avoided praying because you felt like a hypocrite? How many times have you stopped seeking God precisely when you needed Him most, because you thought you had to sort out your inner mess first? But the torn veil means you never have to fix yourself before you draw near. It means you can come to God in the exact state you're in right now. Angry, confused, hurt, desperate, empty, anxious, depressed, bitter, hopeless. Whatever your emotional or spiritual condition is at this moment, the door remains wide open for you. And you know why that's so important? Because it's exactly when we're most broken that we most need healing. It's when we're most lost that we most need direction. It's when we're weakest that we most need strength. It's when we're most alone that we most need company. But there's something about this constant presence of God that I want you to understand in a very practical way. Sometimes we expect it to manifest through mystical sensations, spectacular supernatural experiences, or dramatic revelations. And while that can happen, most of the time the divine presence manifests in much more subtle and everyday ways. It could be through a song that plays at the exact moment you need to hear those lyrics. It could be through a casual conversation with a stranger who says the exact words your heart needed to hear. It could be through an opportunity that appears out of nowhere when you've lost hope. It could be through an inner strength you find to do something that seemed impossible. It could be through the wisdom that comes when you need to make a tough decision, even if you can't explain where that clarity came from. It could be through the peace that descends upon you in the middle of a crisis, a peace that makes no logical sense, but is more real than any reasoning. It could be through the hope that sprouts in your heart when all circumstances are screaming despair. These are not coincidences. They are evidence that the Holy Spirit is actively involved in your life, guiding, comforting, strengthening, and illuminating. He doesn't have to be loud to make a difference. He doesn't have to be dramatic to be powerful. Often, His most transformative presence is also His quietest. And this reminds me of something fundamental about how the torn veil works in practice. It doesn't just give you access to God's presence. It allows that presence to transform you from the inside out. It's as if you were a dry sponge that was suddenly placed in a spring of pure water. You don't have to strain to absorb it. It happens naturally. When you live without barriers between you and God, you naturally begin to reflect His character. Not because you're trying to imitate or forcing behavioral changes, but because it's impossible to remain constantly in the presence of perfect love without being influenced by it. It's like when you spend a lot of time with someone you love and admire. You don't consciously decide to copy their manner of speaking or their gestures, but after a while, people start noticing similarities. You naturally absorb characteristics of the person you are intimate with. The same thing happens with God, only on a much deeper level. When you live in the reality of the torn veil, you begin to love the things God loves. You start to care about the things that matter to Him. You begin to see people through His eyes. You start to respond to situations with the wisdom and patience that flow from Him. But let me be very clear about one thing. This doesn't mean you become perfect. It doesn't mean you never make mistakes again, or that you stop struggling with your human weaknesses. It means you have a constant source of renewal, forgiveness, and strength to start over whenever necessary. It's like having a shower in your home. You can get dirty during the day. You can sweat. You can go through situations that leave you literally grimy. But you know that when you get home, you can take a shower and get completely clean. You don't have to stay dirty. You don't have to carry the day's grime into the next. The torn veil gives you that kind of access. You can get emotionally and spiritually dirty during your daily struggles. You can make decisions you later realize weren't the best. You can react in ways that don't reflect who you really want to be. But you can always come back home, into the Father's arms, and be completely restored. And this restoration isn't just about forgiveness for mistakes. It's about renewing your perspective, your spirit, your hope. It's about remembering who you truly are when all the voices around you are trying to convince you that you are less than that. It's about finding direction when you feel lost and finding purpose when life seems meaningless. But maybe you're asking, if all this is true, why do I still struggle so much? Why do I still have days when I feel completely disconnected from everything you're talking about? And that is a very valid question, one that stirs the heart of anyone seeking spiritual authenticity. The answer has to do with something we're often not taught about the Christian life. Spiritual growth is not a straight upward line. It's more like a spiral. Sometimes it feels like you're returning to the same places, facing the same struggles, having to learn the same lessons. But in reality, you are revisiting these themes at a deeper level, with more maturity, with more tools to handle them. It's like climbing a mountain on a spiral path. Sometimes you look down and recognize landscapes you've seen before, places you've already passed. It might seem like you haven't progressed, but if you pay attention, you'll realize you're seeing those same landscapes from a different height, with a broader perspective. Your struggles today may seem similar to your struggles from years ago, but you are not the same person. You have more experience, more wisdom, more awareness of your patterns and triggers. You know your limitations better, but you also know your strengths better. And most importantly, you know God's character better and how He works in your life. And that makes all the difference, because even when you pass through dark valleys, even when you face intense emotional storms, even when your faith is tested in ways that leave you questioning everything, you have an anchor you didn't have before. You have the experience of having gone through other storms and discovered that God was there the whole time, even when you couldn't see Him. You have memories of moments when He surprised you with provision when you thought there was no way out. You have personal testimonies of times He gave you strength when you thought you couldn't make it another day. You have accumulated evidence that, regardless of how you feel in a given moment, divine faithfulness is a constant in your story. And these memories, these personal testimonies, this evidence become bridges that help you cross the moments of emotional or spiritual drought. When your emotions don't confirm God's presence, your history confirms it. When your feelings whisper that you're alone, your experience shouts that it's not true. This is what it means to live in the reality of the torn veil during life's difficult seasons. It doesn't mean you always feel God's presence, but that you learn to trust in the reality of that presence regardless of what you feel. It doesn't mean you never doubt, but that you choose to believe even when doubting seems more logical. And you know what happens when you make these choices repeatedly. When you decide to trust even when you don't understand, when you choose to draw near even when you feel unworthy, when you opt to believe even when everything seems to contradict your faith, you discover an emotional and spiritual stability that doesn't depend on external circumstances. You develop what I like to call muscular faith, a faith that has been exercised through difficulties, tested through doubts, strengthened through conscious choices to keep believing when it would be easier to give up. And this muscular faith becomes one of the most precious things you can have in life. Because when you have this faith, you can face any storm knowing you will get through it. Not because you are strong enough, but because you are connected to a source of strength that never runs out. Not because you have all the answers, but because you trust someone who does. Not because your life is perfect, but because you have a hope that transcends circumstances. Pause for a moment and reflect. What veils still need to be torn in your life? Give this a like if it made sense and share your experience in the comments. And now we arrive at the most beautiful point of this entire journey we've taken together. We arrive at the moment when you can finally understand that everything we've talked about so far isn't just beautiful theory or inspiring philosophy. It is the most concrete and transformative reality that exists. The torn veil is not just a historical event that happened 2,000 years ago. It is the truth that is redefining your life at this very moment, even if you haven't fully realized it yet. Do you know the difference between knowing about the torn veil and living in the reality of the torn veil? It's the same difference between knowing there's a treasure buried in your backyard and actually digging until you find it. You can spend your whole life knowing there's something valuable down there, but until you decide to pick up a shovel and start digging, the treasure remains just a possibility, not a reality that transforms your financial situation. What I want to show you now is how to pick up that spiritual shovel and start living practically in the freedom that is already yours. How to make this intimacy with God stop being a nice concept and become the driving force that guides every decision, every relationship, and every challenge in your daily life. Because you see, when Jesus died and that veil tore, it wasn't just a symbolic demonstration. It was a literal change in the spiritual reality of the universe. It was as if someone had removed a wall that divided two houses, and suddenly they became one single house. What were once two separate spaces is now an integrated environment, a space of continuous fellowship. And this means something revolutionary for your life. You no longer have to live oscillating between spiritual moments and ordinary moments. You no longer have to divide your existence between sacred time and secular time. You no longer have to wait for special occasions to experience God's presence. Your entire life has become a sacred space where the divine and the human meet naturally. Imagine waking up in the morning and your first reaction isn't anxiety about the day ahead, but gratitude for another day to experience God's goodness in simple things. Imagine having your morning coffee not just as an automatic habit, but as a moment of silent communion, where you can feel that even in the simple act of nourishing your body, something sacred is happening. Imagine leaving home to face your daily responsibilities, not carrying the weight of having to solve everything on your own, but with the peaceful awareness that you have an invisible partner who knows every challenge you will face and has already prepared resources to help you handle them. This isn't fantasy. This is the life that became possible when the veil was torn. But to live this way, you have to make a conscious choice. You have to decide to stop living as if there's still a barrier between you and God, and start living as someone with unrestricted access to the Father's heart. And that choice begins with a change in how you talk to God. Stop making formal prayers and start having real conversations. Stop using only the right words and start talking to Him about what's really happening in your life. Tell Him about that person at work who irritates you. Talk about your fears regarding your financial future. Vent about the frustration you feel when it seems your efforts don't produce the results you expected. God doesn't want to be just the recipient of your emergency prayers. He wants to be your daily confidant, the friend with whom you share not only crises, but also small joys, everyday discoveries, and the random thoughts that cross your mind during the day. And when you start living like this, something incredible happens. You discover that God is not only powerful and distant, but also deeply interested in the details of your life. He cares about the relationship that's worrying you. He has an opinion on the professional decision you need to make. He wants to help you find wisdom to deal with that complicated family situation. More than that, you discover He has a perspective on your life that you never considered. that He sees potential in you that you yourself don't see, that He has plans for your future that are bigger and more beautiful than anything you could dream up on your own. And this reminds me of one of the most liberating truths about the torn veil. When there is no longer a barrier between you and God, there is no longer a limit to what He can do through your life. Not because you have become special or super spiritual, but because you have become available. Not because you have reached a higher level of holiness, but because you have stopped resisting the work He wants to do in you and through you. It's like when you finally stop swimming against the current and decide to float in the direction the river is going. Suddenly you find you can go much farther with much less effort. Not because the river got stronger, but because you stopped fighting it. When you live in the reality of the torn veil, you stop fighting against God's plan for your life and start flowing with it. You stop trying to force open doors that don't want to open and start noticing the doors that God is opening naturally. You stop exhausting yourself trying to make things happen in your own strength and start discovering what it means to be carried by divine strength. And you know what this produces in practice? It produces a peace that doesn't make logical sense. You could be going through objectively difficult circumstances, financial problems, health issues, complicated relationships, but there is something inside you that remains serene, confident that everything will work out, even when you can't see how. This peace doesn't come from ignoring the reality of the problems. It comes from knowing that you are not facing these problems alone. It comes from the certainty that the same power that created the universe is actively working to resolve the issues in your life. It comes from understanding that, regardless of how things look now, the final story will be one of victory. And this certainty frees you to live in a completely different way. It frees you to be generous even when your resources are limited, because you know your provision doesn't just depend on what you can see. It frees you to forgive people who have hurt you deeply because you no longer have to carry the weight of bitterness. You can hand that pain over to someone who knows exactly how to heal it. It frees you to dream big, to believe in possibilities that seem impossible to human eyes, to take steps of faith that others would consider foolish. Because when you live without a veil between you and God, you start to see life through His eyes, and for Him, there are no impossible situations, only situations that have not yet manifested the miracle that is already prepared. But let me tell you something about this life and the reality of the torn veil that might surprise you. It doesn't make you less human. It makes you more human. It doesn't disconnect you from the people around you. It connects you with them more deeply. It doesn't make you float in a spiritual bubble. It plants you firmly in reality, but with a completely transformed perspective. When you live in constant intimacy with God, you begin to see other people through His eyes. That annoying person at work is no longer just someone who complicates your life, but becomes someone who is struggling with their own wounds and fears. That difficult family member is no longer just a source of stress, but becomes someone who desperately needs to experience the same unconditional love you are learning to receive. Your relationships begin to transform not because you are trying to change people, but because you are changing. Not because you are preaching to them, but because there is something different in the way you treat them. There is more patience, more compassion, more ability to see beyond surface behaviors and recognize the deepest needs of the human heart. And this creates a beautiful domino effect. When you offer unconditional love to someone, that person feels safe to let their own defenses down. When you respond with kindness to someone who is being harsh, you disarm their aggression. When you choose to forgive instead of retaliating, you break cycles of hurt that sometimes perpetuate for generations. You become an agent of healing in every environment where you live, not through grand dramatic gestures, but through small daily choices to respond to people with the same kind of grace you are learning to receive from God. And this makes me think of one of the most beautiful realities of a life without veils. When you no longer have to hide your imperfections from God, you also stop trying to hide them from the important people in your life. You discover that authentic vulnerability, instead of pushing people away, actually creates deeper, more genuine connections. When you can admit your struggles without shame, when you can ask for help without feeling weak, when you can cry in front of others without feeling exposed, you give other people permission to be real with you too. And this transforms all your relationships from social performances into genuine connections. But perhaps the most transformative aspect of living in the reality of the torn veil is how it changes your relationship with life's difficulties. When you know you have direct access to the perfect comforter, the storms still come, but you are no longer devastated by them. When you know you have an inexhaustible source of wisdom, complex problems still arise, but you are no longer paralyzed by them. You develop what I like to call spiritual resilience, an ability to bend without breaking, to be wounded without being destroyed, to go through loss without losing hope. Not because you have become numb to pain, but because you have discovered a source of renewal that is deeper than any wound. And this resilience isn't just for you. It becomes one of the greatest blessings you can offer to the people around you. When others see you going through difficulties with grace, when they see you finding hope in desperate situations, when they see you being carried by a strength that clearly does not come from you, it awakens in them a desire for the same kind of spiritual support. You become a living testimony that it is possible to live differently, that it is possible to have peace in the midst of chaos, hope in the midst of despair, joy in the midst of sorrow, that there is a way of being human that doesn't depend on external circumstances to find meaning and purpose. And this leads me to what is perhaps the most exciting aspect of this whole journey. When you live in the reality of the torn veil, you begin to discover your unique role in God's plan for this world. You begin to understand that you are not a cosmic accident, not just another number in a crowd of billions. You are an intentional creation with a specific purpose that no one else can fulfill. This purpose may not be something that makes headlines. It may not involve fame or public recognition, but it will be something that only you can do, in the way only you can do it, in the place where only you can be. It might be being a presence of peace in a family marked by conflict. It might be offering hope to people going through the same kind of difficulty you have already overcome. It might be using your professional talents to solve problems that are impacting real lives. It might be being the kind of parent who breaks negative patterns and establishes a legacy of love for the next generations. Regardless of your specific purpose, one thing is certain: when you live without veils between you and God, you have access to all the resources needed to fulfill that purpose. You have wisdom to make the right decisions, strength to persevere when things get tough, love to treat people the way they need to be treated, and faith to believe in possibilities that others cannot see. And as you walk in this direction, as you discover and fulfill your unique purpose, something wonderful happens. You find a deep satisfaction that cannot be shaken by external circumstances. You discover what it means to live a life that is truly worthwhile, a life that leaves the world a little better than it was when you arrived. You understand that all your experiences, the good and the bad, the victories and the defeats, the moments of joy and the periods of pain, all contributed to preparing you for this moment, for this role, for this unique contribution that only you can offer. And this gives retroactive meaning to everything you have lived through. That difficult phase you went through becomes the experience that allows you to help others who are going through something similar. That mistake you made becomes the lesson that teaches you how to prevent others from falling into the same trap. That skill you developed almost by accident becomes the perfect tool to solve a problem that was waiting for your intervention. Nothing in your life was wasted. Nothing was an accident. Even the things that seemed like complete losses were being used to sculpt in you the character and wisdom needed for the work God planned for you to do. And when you see your life from this perspective, when you understand that every day is an opportunity to live out your divine purpose, when you realize that every interaction is a chance to leave an eternal impact on someone's life, your existence takes on a dimension of meaning that transforms even the most mundane activities into acts of worship. You no longer have to live wondering if your life has meaning. You no longer have to question if you truly matter. You no longer have to seek validation in external achievements or the approval of other people. Because you have discovered that you were created with intention, called with purpose, and equipped with everything you need to make a real difference in the world. And this discovery, this revelation of who you truly are and what you were called to do, is only possible because the veil was torn. It is only possible because you have direct access to the heart of God, where all your purposes were conceived and where all the resources to fulfill them are available. But I want you to understand one thing. This life I'm describing is not an unattainable fantasy. It is not something reserved for special or super spiritual people. It is the normal life of anyone who decides to stop living as if there is still a veil and starts living in the reality of the divine intimacy that is already theirs by right. The only difference between where you are now and where you could be is a decision. The decision to believe that the veil was truly torn. The decision to start living as if you have complete access to God's heart. The decision to stop behaving like a spiritual orphan and start behaving like the beloved child you have always been. And this decision doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to have everything figured out in your mind before you take the first step. You don't have to understand all the mysteries of faith before you start living by faith. You just need to take one step in the direction of divine intimacy, and you will discover that God is running to meet you halfway. Starting is simple. The next time you wake up, before you even get out of bed, talk to God as you would to your best friend. Tell him how you slept, what you're feeling, what you're expecting from the day. Don't use fancy words or religious language. Use your own words, your own way of expressing yourself. During the day, when you're facing a challenging situation, remember that you are not alone. Say a silent prayer asking for wisdom, strength, or patience. You don't need to close your eyes or assume a special posture. God hears the whispers of your heart, even in the midst of life's daily noise. When something good happens, when you receive news that makes you happy, when you experience a moment of beauty or gratitude, share that joy with God. Thank Him not only for the big things, but for the small kindnesses He pours into your life every day. And when you mess up, when you make choices that are not the best, when you behave in a way that doesn't reflect who you want to be, don't hide from God. Run to Him. Ask for forgiveness without beating around the bush. Receive forgiveness without question, and move forward knowing that you have been completely restored. As you practice this daily intimacy with God, you will find that it becomes as natural as breathing. You will realize that you can maintain a constant conversation with Him, even while you're doing other things. You will discover that He has opinions on your decisions, insights into your relationships, and direction for your plans. And gradually, very naturally, your life will align with God's heart. Your priorities will change. Your relationships will deepen. Your perspective on problems will transform. Your capacity to love, forgive, and serve will grow. Not because you are trying to be a better person, but because you are living in constant connection with the source of all goodness, all wisdom, all love. It is impossible to remain connected to that source without being transformed by it. If you feel that God is speaking to your heart through this message, give it a like and share it with someone who needs this hope. What transformation do you desire in your life? And so we come to the end of our journey together. But in truth, this is not an end. It is a new beginning. It is the moment when you step out of this space of reflection and return to your daily life, carrying within your heart a truth that can change absolutely everything. The veil was torn, and that means you never have to live as if there is any distance between you and the love of God again. Think about everything we've discussed. We started by talking about that extraordinary moment when Jesus died and a sacred fabric ripped on its own, tearing from top to bottom without a single human hand touching it. But we discovered that this event was far more than an impressive supernatural phenomenon. It was a visual and physical declaration that all the barriers separating us from a real intimacy with God had been removed forever. We explored together how these barriers are not just abstract concepts, but very concrete realities that we all face. The barrier of guilt that whispers you've done too much to deserve forgiveness. The barrier of shame that insists you need to fix yourself before approaching the sacred. The barrier of fear that makes you hesitate to trust completely in someone you cannot see with your physical eyes. The barrier of empty religiosity that turns faith into a tiresome performance instead of a living, transformative relationship. We talked about how these barriers were built throughout your life through painful experiences, hurtful words, accumulated disappointments, and distorted teachings you received. And most importantly, we discovered that the tearing of the veil was not just a historical event, but a present spiritual reality that declares all these separations have already been overcome. We walked together through the understanding that living in the reality of the torn veil doesn't mean you will never feel pain or go through difficulties again. It means you never have to face those difficulties alone again. It means there is a constant presence by your side, a strength that is greater than any problem, a wisdom that can guide you when you don't know which way to turn, and a love that can heal any wound, no matter how deep. We discovered that this intimacy with God doesn't have to be reserved for special moments or religious ceremonies. It can become the constant reality of your daily life, transforming every conversation, every decision, and every challenge into an opportunity to experience divine companionship in a practical and comforting way. And perhaps most importantly, you discovered that you don't need to prepare or fix yourself before you start living this intimacy. The veil was torn from top to bottom, symbolizing that it was a divine initiative, not a human one. It was God coming to you, not you managing to get to Him. This means you can approach exactly as you are right now, with all your imperfections, fears, wounds, and limitations. During this journey, we explored how this reality transforms not only your relationship with God, but all your relationships. How the experience of being completely accepted by the Creator frees you to offer genuine acceptance to others. How the divine forgiveness you receive empowers you to forgive in ways that once seemed impossible. How the peace you find in the midst of your own storms becomes a refuge you can offer to others facing their own battles. We saw how living without veils between you and God connects you with your unique purpose in this world. How every experience in your life, even the most painful ones, was used to sculpt in you the character and wisdom needed for the specific work that only you can do. How your healed wounds become sources of healing for others. How your forgiven mistakes become bridges of compassion for people making similar mistakes. And we discovered that this life of divine intimacy is not an unattainable religious fantasy, but the normal life that becomes possible for anyone who decides to stop living as if barriers still exist and starts living in the reality of the freedom that has already been won. But beyond all that, I hope that throughout this conversation you have felt something stirring within your heart. I hope you have experienced moments when a hope you didn't even know you still had was awakened. Moments when you thought, what if this is really true? What if I really can live like this? Because this hope that is dawning in you is not a product of your imagination or the result of emotional manipulation. It is the Holy Spirit whispering to your soul that everything we've talked about here is not only true, but true specifically for you. It is God confirming in your heart that you are not hearing these words by chance, that there is a personal invitation being extended to you right now. The invitation is not for you to become a perfect person overnight. It is not for you to solve all your problems before you draw near. It is not for you to pretend you don't have doubts or fears. The invitation is for you to take the first step on a journey of growing intimacy with the one who loves you more than you can comprehend. And that first step is simple. It is deciding to believe that the veil was truly torn. It is choosing to approach God with the same naturalness you would approach someone who loves you unconditionally. It is starting to talk to Him about your real life, your true feelings, your honest fears, your sincere hopes. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be perfect. It can be as simple as a quiet conversation in traffic, thanking Him for another day of life. It can be a whispered prayer before an important meeting, asking for wisdom. It can be a moment of gratitude when you see a beautiful sunset, acknowledging the beauty that was created for you to enjoy. As you practice this daily intimacy, you will find that it grows naturally. You will realize that God is not a distant concept, but a real presence who genuinely cares about every detail of your life. You will experience moments of inexplicable peace, flashes of wisdom that come from nowhere, an inner strength you didn't know you had. And on the difficult days, when life hits you hard and you feel that all this talk of divine intimacy seems far from your painful reality, remember the torn veil. Remember that no matter how you feel, no matter how lost or broken you are, the barrier remains removed. Access remains granted. The invitation still stands. God will not get tired of you. He will not give up when you go through phases of doubt. He will not be disappointed when you take a long time to learn the lessons He is trying to teach you. He will not close the door when you pull away for a while because you're angry with Him or confused about His ways. The veil was torn once and for all. What was done cannot be undone. The love that was demonstrated cannot be withdrawn. The intimacy that became possible cannot be canceled because of your imperfect behavior or your wavering faith. And in the moments when you can see your life from this perspective, when you can feel, even briefly, this reality of being completely loved and accepted, you will understand that you have found the most precious treasure that exists. It is not a treasure you can lose if you do something wrong. It is not a treasure that can be stolen by adverse circumstances. It is an eternal treasure that lives inside you, and transforms everything around you. This intimacy with God becomes the source from which everything you need to live a full and meaningful life flows. From it comes the peace you need to face the uncertainties of the future. From it comes the wisdom you need to make wise decisions. From it comes the love you need to relate well to the important people in your life. From it comes the hope you need to not give up when things get tough. And when you live connected to this source, you become a channel through which these blessings flow to the people around you. Your family experiences more peace because you are no longer desperately trying to control everything. Your friends find more hope because you have a different perspective on problems. Your colleagues feel more lightness because you are no longer carrying the weight of all responsibilities alone. You become part of the solution in the environments where you live, not through preaching or trying to convert people, but through the silent witness of a life that has found something real, something that works, something that makes a concrete difference in the day-to-day. And perhaps this is one of the greatest joys of living in the reality of the torn veil. Discovering that you can be a source of blessing for others, that your life can leave a positive mark on the world, that you can be part of the process through which other people also discover this transformative intimacy with God. But even if none of that happened, even if you never influenced anyone or left any visible legacy, it would still be infinitely worth it to live in this divine intimacy, because at the end of the day, the greatest gift is not what you can give to others, but what you receive daily from a God who loves you without conditions. It's waking up each morning knowing you are known, loved, and accepted. It's facing the day's challenges knowing you have an invisible partner who is greater than any problem. It's lying down at night knowing that regardless of how the day went, you are still the beloved child of a perfect Father. It's living with the certainty that your life has meaning, that you matter, that you were created with purpose, and that this purpose is being fulfilled even when you can't clearly see how. It's knowing that nothing you have lived through was wasted, that even the most painful experiences are being used to sculpt something beautiful and useful in you. It's having a hope that transcends circumstances, a joy that doesn't depend on everything going right, a peace that remains firm even when everything around you is in turmoil. It's discovering that there is a way of being human that doesn't live on the emotional roller coaster of external circumstances, but finds stability in a deeper, more permanent spiritual reality. And all of this, absolutely all of it, became possible when that veil was torn. When Jesus gave his life and that physical barrier was ripped apart, all spiritual barriers were also removed. What seemed impossible became not only possible but normal for anyone who decides to live in this new reality. So, as you prepare to leave this moment of reflection and return to your daily activities, I want you to take with you not just information about the torn veil, but the deep conviction that you can live differently from now on, that you can wake up tomorrow and begin to experience in practice this intimacy with God that we've talked about here. You don't need to wait until you feel ready. You don't need to first resolve your emotional or spiritual issues. You don't need to reach a higher level of faith or holiness. You can start exactly as you are, where you are, with what you have available now. And as you walk on this journey, you will discover that each day brings new opportunities to experience the reality of the torn veil. Each situation becomes a chance to practice the presence of God. Each relationship becomes an opportunity to reflect the love you are learning to receive. Each challenge becomes an occasion to discover that you have access to spiritual resources that make possible what seemed impossible. And in the moments when you forget, when you revert to old patterns of trying to solve everything on your own or feeling separated from divine love, be gentle with yourself. Remember that learning to live in the reality of the torn veil is a process, not a switch you flip, and instantly everything changes. Every time you remember to talk with God during the day, you are practicing this intimacy. Every time you choose to trust instead of despair, you are living in the reality of the torn veil. Every time you approach God with your real problems instead of trying to solve them alone, you are experiencing the freedom that has become yours by right. And now, before we say goodbye, I want to invite you to a special moment of prayer. Not a formal or religious prayer, but an intimate conversation between you and the one who loves you more than anyone in this world. A conversation where you can be completely honest, completely yourself, completely vulnerable, knowing that you are in the presence of someone who accepts you exactly as you are at this moment. Close your eyes with me, Or if you prefer, keep them open. But let your heart open to this loving presence that is right here with us now. Feel that there is no veil, no barrier, no distance between you and the heart of God. You are safe. You are home. You are in the place where you have always belonged. Loving Father, we have come this far together. I and this precious person listening to these words right now. You know exactly who they are. You know every detail of their story, every wound in their heart, every dream kept in their soul. You know them better than they know themselves. And yet, or perhaps precisely because of it, you love them with a love that has no conditions, no limits, no end. Lord, I ask that in this moment you would confirm in this person's heart the truth that the veil was truly torn, that they might feel, even if subtly, the reality of your presence here and now, that they might experience a little of what it means to be completely accepted by you, not because of what they do or don't do, but simply because of who they are, your beloved child, created in your image, desired by your heart. If they are going through a time of pain, Lord, I ask that you be a balm to their wounds. If they are facing difficult circumstances, I ask that you be their strength and their wisdom. If they are feeling lost or confused about the future, I ask that you be their light and their direction. If they are carrying guilt or shame, I ask that you be their complete forgiveness and their total freedom. Father, I ask that you remove once and for all any veil that might still exist in this person's mind or heart. Every lie they may have believed about themselves, every distortion about who you are, every barrier that might be preventing them from experiencing the intimacy with you that you so desire. May they wake up tomorrow with a new awareness that they can talk to you about anything, at any time, from anywhere. Lord, I ask that you use this person's life in beautiful and powerful ways, not necessarily in ways that draw the world's attention, but in ways that touch hearts, that bring hope to discouraged people, that demonstrate your love in practical actions and kind words. May they discover the joy of being used by you to bless others. And when they go through moments of doubt, when circumstances make this intimacy with you seem distant, I ask that you remind them of this conversation we had today, that you bring back to their heart the certainty that you are always present, always available, always interested in every detail of their life. Father, I place this person in your loving hands. I know you have beautiful plans for them, plans for hope and not for disaster, plans to give them a future and a hope. I know you will take care of them better than anyone in this world could. I know that your love for them is eternal, unshakable, unconditional. May they rest in that certainty. May they live in the freedom of being loved without having to earn that love. May they experience the peace of knowing they never again have to carry life's burdens alone. May they know the joy of having a real, intimate, transformative relationship with you. I thank you, Lord, for this special person. I thank you for the journey the two of you will take together from this day forward. I thank you because I know you will surprise them with your goodness, with your faithfulness, with your constant presence in their life. In the name of Jesus, who tore the veil so that this intimacy would be possible. Amen. And now, as you open your eyes and turn your attention back to the world around you, I want you to know that something has changed. Maybe you can't quite define what it is. Maybe you don't feel a dramatic transformation, but something has shifted. The seed of the truth about the torn veil has been planted in your heart, and that seed will sprout and grow in the days to come. You are no longer alone on your journey. You have a constant companion who loves you more than you can comprehend, who has the power to change any situation, the wisdom to guide you through any confusion, and grace enough to sustain you through any difficulty. You are loved. You are accepted. You are valuable. You have purpose. You have a future. You have hope. Not because you deserve any of it, but because it was given freely by someone who decided to love you without conditions. And nothing you do or don't do can change that reality. The veil was torn. The barrier was removed. The way is open. Your new life of intimacy with God can begin now, at this very moment. And it will be a beautiful adventure, full of discovery, growth, transformation, and joy. May you carry with you, wherever you go, the certainty that you are deeply loved, completely accepted, and eternally embraced by the heart of God. And may that certainty transform every day every relationship, every challenge, and every joy into an opportunity to experience a little more of the divine intimacy that changed everything when that veil was torn. Go in peace, knowing that you never again have to live separated from the love that created you, redeemed you, and calls you home every single day. The veil was torn, and you are free.